Welcome back to the Pro Series Podcast. This is episode 97 with Nancy Weinman. Nancy is the owner and founder of Weinman Architectural Services out of Arizona and New York. During this episode, we talk about her career and how much architecture has changed throughout the years and what makes her different than any other architect. But before we get into this episode, please like, subscribe, and review this podcast on wherever you listen to podcasts. It truly helps the podcast and the success of the podcast. But now I hope you enjoy episode 97 with Nancy Weinman. Nancy, thank you so much for hopping on the Pro Series podcast. Excited to talk to you today about your expertise and everything you have accomplished.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, I always like to talk about how I found the guest or how the guest found me. And I had Monique actually reached out to me and sent me all this stuff that you have accomplished. And I'm like, wow, she needs to be on my podcast. There's so much to learn from this. And I started this podcast kind of as a hobby, and people do listen to it and they inspire, but it's something that I like, and selfishly, I like to listen to other people's journeys and how they got to where they are. So I want to start off on obviously you're an architect. I want to talk about how you got into that. Did it start at a young age, or when did that all start?
So I became an architect the first year in college, and prior to that, I was a cellist. So I think there was some architecture going on behind the scenes when I was a cellist. For instance, even in my instructor's living room where I practiced, her husband was an architect, and so there were always these beautiful renderings of homes on the wall. So maybe subliminally, I thought that was going to happen, but I was a cellist. And I started fourth grade, and I loved it until I got to college. And I had been to the Aspen Music School before that, which is just beautiful. And you play on the creek, and it's all about the nature. And when I got to my college in New Mexico with that same vision in mind, I was kind of thrown down in the basement with a teacher that I didn't particularly like. And I'm like, wait a second, this is not going to work. So I went back home to New York City, told my parents. They were, this was in the 70s, so there were no helicopter parents around. They're like, figure it out and let us know. So I went to the Museum of Modern Art, and there was a Italian furniture exhibit. And I was just enamored with it. And I'm like, okay, that's it. I'll just be an architect. I'm very good at math. I'm very good at art. That's the missing element. I'll just be an architect. So I decided that moment, went back to New Mexico, knocked on the door of the Department of Architecture and said, okay, I'm transferring from music to architecture. And basically they're like, come on in. There's you and two other women. So it's like, oh, okay. So I did that.
My gosh. Well, growing up in New York probably helped your architectural bug as well, because you walk around, you see. Did you grow up in the city?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So you were around amazing architecture. You're pretty much
Listen, to this day, when I go home and I look down the streets of the Upper East Side with the mansions there, I'm like, no wonder. I mean, it does get under your skin when I was raised there from second grade to 12th grade and went home all the time. And it's like, there is a certain taste level, I think, that gets acquired, i.e. good taste, because you see beauty all the time, and you see incredible fashion, and you see museums and the artists, everybody's there.
yeah. That's one place I've still never been to New York City.
Oh, well, you must.
I know.
Although it's not exactly, if I was going to take you for a ride, I would say, well, could we go back like 40 years, and then I would
Yeah.
like to present to you New York City as it was.
Yeah. Was it residential architecture that interested you, or was it commercial, or was it both?
Well, both. I actually was fortunate enough to live pretty close to the Metropolitan Museum of Art,
Okay.
which is this magnanimous, building, and then all the side streets from there also have beautiful Beaux-Arts architecture, classic Doric columns, Ionic columns. I mean, it was just, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's absolutely beautiful. Recently, I was in London. The same beauty is there. The buildings are just incredible.
Yeah, that's another place I've always wanted to go to. So after school, did you go into a firm? Did you start your business? What happened right after school?
So I was in New Mexico, so I was a little bit of a pioneer girl doing not the Manhattan thing.
Okay.
And I moved to the Four Corners area because it was a surge in oil and gas,
Oh.
and there was a lot of work there.
Hmm.
So my husband was an electrician, I was an architect, so I went and worked for a firm there for a period of time. I worked for a woman who had her own business out in her house, and it wasn't very many years, and I started my own business called Designer Drafting. And I would do home plans for the contractors that were doing homes. And it was like $250 for a set of plans. You want to flip it this way? Okay, it's another $250. Okay, you want to add 2 feet? Another $250. So I was just doing these plans. And that's how I really started getting my feet wet in construction and architecture.
Yeah. So all hand drawing, right? Were you doing
Hmm?
it all hand drawn?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Holy crap. In design school, we learned hand drawing the first semester. I wish we learned more of it. I think it's like a dying breed, which I wish more people knew how to hand render and everything. Do you still do the hand drawings today?
The preliminary sketches are always hand drawings, and I've actually taken it to another level where my sidekick is botanical drawing, which is very specific, intricate drawings of flowers and plants. And I find that it comes very easily because I spent so many hours and days and years drafting, whether it was with pencil or ink on mylar, plastic lead, all of these things.
Yeah, I mean, your art background kind of comes into play here when you're doing the drafting. So when I ask that question, I'm like, oh, well, she was an artist before. She liked art, so that makes sense
Yeah, but I
why you.
wasn't really doing any painting or anything like that. I was just because I spent so much time with the cello.
Yeah,
So I did learn discipline, which I think was very appropriate to the architectural industry because you have to have a lot of discipline. There's a lot of long hours. But actually, in school, they didn't teach me how to draw. And when I showed up at my first job, they're like, draft this. And I'm like, I was kind of like looking at the guy next to me, and he was kind of teaching me because they taught me other things about the world of architecture, contracts, how to have the business of being an architect, but not really. They said, "Oh, well, you'll just learn that on the job." So it was like,
oh, okay.
okay, okay.
That's
So
the
I
first
did
time I've heard
that.
that.
Yeah,
Jeez. So,
yeah.
do you know? So, were you before you went into school? Was CAD out?
No.
Okay.
So it came when I was working actually in San Francisco, and interestingly enough, because I didn't know CAD, I became a project manager because it was more appropriate for my skill set to do that rather than start learning CAD. So I had to know enough to tell people what to do on CAD, so I understand the mechanics of it.
Yeah.
But I am not the drafts person, and to this day, I have a full-time employee that does nothing but drawings for me.
Yeah. Today, if someone was going to school for architecture, do they learn CAD in school, or is that more for a draftsman? I mean, interior design, we do learn, Revit and CAD and
Yeah,
stuff.
I don't think they don't have paper and pencils hanging around.
No, no, okay. That's funny because we still learn the hand drafting side of it in design school for interior designers.
Well, yeah, and that's very useful because especially when you're talking to a client and you want to show them something, unless you're further in your design, like the very schematic phase where you're just doing bubble diagrams and adjacencies about where things are going to be, you want to be able to do that in front of a client and you want it to look particularly nice when you're done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I I know and you said if we go back in time and go see New York 40 years ago or 30 years ago, that's when you'd prefer me to go see it. But what's something that's in the architectural field that has lost over time with technology that you wish it would go back to? Like,
Well, I mean, the most beautiful drawings, like you say, hand drawings on flimsy paper with, ink and watercolor. It's something that I want to do later on in life, just because I think the art sense of it is beautiful.
mhm.
But the renderings and artificial intelligence and what you can do, I mean, that's just like, it's like an amazing movie compared to a silent movie.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I always think that we lose that with technology. I mean, technology is great in a sense, but the whole hand drafting thing is a complete art that has been lost for most people,
Right,
especially
right.
people my age.
Yes, and usually if I do a sketch for somebody, they'll go, "Oh, that's so cool." Like, we've never seen sketches, and it's like, "Oh, well, that's kind of just what I do." I didn't know. It just became cool recently.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think maybe shows kind of created that spark back in it because I've noticed in shows they do a lot more hand drafting. It just kind of gives it a more personal attachment to the job.
Well, not only that, I think when you draw something, it's like when you write something down, you'll remember it better, right?
That's right. Yeah.
If you just read something, it's hard to remember it, but if you had to rewrite it and then remember it the next day, you're going to be much better at it. So when you draw, you're really thinking about what you're doing, and your head is like going through the space that you're creating. And it's a slower pace when you draw, and I think that's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely helps your memory. It helps your just remember the job more. And something that we kind of talked off camera that I want to segue into is the psychology of design. You know, interior design and architecture, we touch very closely. We work very closely together, and we deal with clients in kind of the same way when it comes to budgeting, when statuses go crazy. What is some opinions you have on keeping your cool and mindset for an architecture or an architect or a designer out there when jobs are kind of going crazy or lead times go crazy? What's your advice
Right.
for them?
Well, listen, I think when you have confidence, people follow you. Like I have a funny thing with my husband when we're ever in a city that I don't know, I seem to have confidence and say it's definitely this way. And then he'll follow me and it'll always be the wrong way. So if you have confidence and you know in your heart of hearts that things are going to work out, then that is a little contagious in a good way for a client, because once you're there and you go, oh, well, no worries, we're going to do this, that, and the other, they kind of get that calm, that you're the drawing from yourself that you're bringing to the job, and then they're kind of in the calm bucket.
Yeah.
I had a client once and he goes, "You see that baseboard? There's a cut like in the wrong spot, like right in the middle of his, below his window, which happened to be on Fifth Avenue looking at the park. Like, yes, that cut is in the wrong spot." And he goes, "Well, I don't understand. Why aren't you all upset about that?" I go, "Dr. Hart, because like we're just gonna take it off and redo it and put it back. Like, it's not really a problem."
Yeah.
So he was a surgeon, and with surgeons and some other businesses, there's no oops, there's no doing it over. It has to be exactly right. In construction, you really do get a couple of chances to do it better if it doesn't come out right. So why would you get so all upset about that? You should just be thinking about, how am I going to fix this and where are we going with this?
hmm And that's something very important to think about. I learned this very early on in my career is to put yourself in the customer's shoes in the way they're thinking. So I always ask, is this your first renovation project? Because
Mm-hmm.
if you
Mm-hmm.
don't ask that question, you don't know what they're thinking. And
Right.
if they don't know what's going on and you're not telling them, they're gonna be in a high stress level. It's important to know where they're coming from. So when in that instance, the surgeon, you understood that right away, like where he was coming from, which
Right.
is such
Right.
an important thing.
Yes, I usually ask if it's their first construction project. Also, I ask who's in charge, like between the couple.
Oh, okay. How do you ask that?
I just asked that.
Okay.
And sometimes they look at each other, or sometimes immediately, they know. And
Okay.
sometimes there'll be one of the two of the couple that will be kind of in charge of the project. Um, in some cases, maybe maybe the wife is in charge of what it looks like, maybe the husband's in charge of the budget. Sometimes the other way. So that's an important, like, you really do need to know who you're talking to, because you could be talking to the woman all the way through and then find out, well, the guy just nixed this idea because whatever, the budget, what have you. So that's important, but I think that I'm very comfortable with design and construction because I've been doing it for many, many years. There's not really anything that you can mess up. It's sort of like when somebody gets on a computer and they haven't been, and they're afraid to touch buttons. You can't mess up. You have to touch a button or you're not going to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of older people, like, I don't know, I don't want to break it. So in construction, design and construction, you almost, in design in particular, you want to do as many solutions to find some solutions that don't work, to be sure that you're onto the one and only solution that's the perfect solution for you. So I'll encourage people to kind of mess up and take their time and dream a lot and decide on certain things, silly as they may be, because you want to be sure when you start moving forward that that's the design you want.
Oh,
And in construction, they're human beings still that are putting these things together. I mean, I had a guy, and he put a bathroom floor tile upside down. Like, the back kind of did look like the front. I mean, it wasn't, it was like it was like a clear
really
tile with a little bit of color in it, like you couldn't really tell. And so, it's such an upsetting thing to the client. And I go, first of all, it's only like 4 square feet and it's his deal. So we tell him to take it out and he puts it back.
yeah.
Okay, the next week it's done. Like, see, it's like we make mistakes. We do make mistakes.
Oh, absolutely. How about when it comes to designing for the client and designing for yourself? I think a lot of designers out there or architects out there design for themselves or their portfolio. What's your advice on that, and which way do you go?
So I have seen people do that.
Mhm.
I've seen interior designers do that because they're really looking at the end game of what it's going to look like in the magazine, and
Yeah.
it's really unfair. So all my homes would look the same if it didn't involve the clients. I like to take the clients because they're sort of the flavor of the month or whatever, and I'm going to make a home for them. It's their home. At the end of the design, I was joking with one client, and it's like, she said something about your design, and it's like, no, Maggie, it's your design. Like, we like to fool around with it, like, who designed this? Like, I want the client to feel like it was their design. I kept them out of trouble, perhaps, but when they're walking in, they need to know that they were the ones that were designing this with me, because you don't want them to walk in and have them feel like, I told you I didn't like this.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like, see, you have the pantry exactly what you were thinking about. I mean, it really has to be, you're holding hands and you're kind of jumping off together.
Oh, yeah. I always feel like if you're a designer trying to design for yourself, you might as well just go into house flipping because you're you're
Right,
not you're not in it for the right thing. It's not like a
right.
doctor is telling a patient that what they're going to need to do. You,
So, I mean, I have a home that's about to open or finish construction, and it started as a speculative home.
okay.
I designed it as I design my own house and some other homes because I sort of have a style, right?
Yeah.
And after the driveway was in, we sold the house. Sold the set of plans and the driveway build, basically.
Okay.
And they walk through my house and they're like, well, I love your house. I want this house to be exactly like your house. Well, it sort of is already because I did that. But I was always wanting to know, well, what are you about and how do we conform to who you are to make this a personalized home for you? So there's certain aspects that they selected, or I promoted, or we worked together on, so that it has to be their signature in the home. I don't
Oh,
want my home
absolutely.
repeated over and over and over again. I want it to be the person's home that's going to live there.
Yeah, absolutely. They need to feel comfortable, and they can't feel comfortable in a space that it's not them.
Well, some people could actually, and some people walk into my house and say, "We'll just do this. This will be perfect." But I really want it to be their house. I don't want it to be my house.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
So
sometimes you have to pull that from certain clients because they'll be shy at the beginning or whatever. And then other clients are more difficult because they think they know exactly what they want.
yeah.
But all of those personalities together will get you where you need as long as you're not talking all the time and you're listening and you go to their house and you visualize what they like and then you're basically transforming it into good design.
Yes, absolutely. And the biggest thing I heard from what you just said is listening. And
Hmm.
most people don't listen when it's you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you for the job. Um,
Right.
so
Well,
that's
yes. I
huge.
mean, at this point in my career, it's almost like if I had a client and he was talking about the price, and I said the price difference doesn't really matter because we're together for 3 years. We're going to be designing and drawing for a year and permitting, and then the build is 2 years. So it's really all about if we can connect and communicate with each other, not if it's another $10,000 or what have you. I mean, it really doesn't matter. The success is in the relationship.
Oh, absolutely, 100%.
Yeah.
So, going back in time, what would you give yourself or someone that's fresh out of school or earlier in their career advice on something that you learned along the way that you did not know before and you wish you kind of didn't know?
Well, so when I was really young, I was shy.
Okay.
And so just by mere personality, I would never say anything in the room until other people spoke. And I realized later that that was an advantage because a lot of people come in the room and they start talking and they don't even know who their audience is.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're an architect, like we were talking before, everybody loves to show their portfolio. You know, it's like somebody coming to your house and you want to go, oh, eat this and drink this. I have this for you. And, you want to show off, you want to show your portfolio. And most people, sort of like dating, they sized you up in the first 5 minutes. They probably already know your work. The real question is there an energy there together where you can design together, which is a thing. I mean, it's not a natural process. It has to be learned for some people. And there's disappointments, and there's wonderful days, and there's rules and strict things in terms of like the budget and how we build things and safety. And they're stepping into a world that maybe they haven't been in before.
Hmm.
So many times I feel like I'm shepherding people through the process. Like they haven't been through this process before, and it's like I feel like it's okay. We're gonna go through this hallway, and then we're gonna go in this dark room, and then we're gonna go around the corner. In each phase of construction, like yes, that's normal. You don't have the hardware because it always comes later, or you don't have this, or you know, this is gonna be finished out with a sluter strip, and it's really not gonna look like this. And so you're telling them all this stuff, which is just like you just have this knowledge but it's all new information. And so you have to be kind of a mentor and a teacher and yeah, shepherding people. Sometimes you have to be the mother, sometimes you have to be the father,
Hmm.
sometimes you have to be the strict teacher.
Yeah, absolutely. Hold their hand. And sometimes you almost have to like dummy it down in a way that it's not we're so used to being in our world, our design world, and seeing the technical terms and all that stuff. And when we say the technical stuff, they're not going to get that. You need to quote unquote dummy it down a little bit so they could understand what you're talking about to calm
Right,
them down and
right.
so they could comprehend what's going on.
Right. Now, I think the most important thing is that you are sort of like their stockbroker. They're giving you a lot of money to come up with something.
Yeah.
Especially these days, it's over $1 million in most cases. So, in order for them to entrust you with those decisions, you're like you're like their broker, and they want to
Yeah.
get the best value for what they've given you to spend. And it's not to be taken lightly.
No, that's a good way to think about it. I've never heard it said in that form, but like that makes sense. You're a stakeholder, and like what you're doing, they're investing a lot of money.
Right. So I use some of the tips that I learned when I was a project director on a project where it was by the state of New Jersey, and it was $1.4 billion. And we were in charge of spending that money correctly
Oh
to
my.
do health and safety for schools and to build 15 new schools. We were in charge of hiring the architects and the contractors. That was a huge responsibility. Similar with another bank conversion that we did for Bank of America. We were changing, they were purchasing other banks, we were turning them into Bank of America, a lot of like 5,000 ATMs, 1,500. So the process that I went through in that corporate world, where we were holding this huge amount of money and making recommendation to hire certain architects, hire certain contractors, the buildability, the methods of construction, and the corporate meetings that we had, always in suit and tie and reporting, I moved that into what I do today. And today I do a lot of Excel documents. I have a database that I use that's almost similar to what I did when I did multiple either bank projects or Macy's projects or health and safety. And so everybody has a portal, and I take the accounting very seriously, which is, it's different right side, left side of the brain. You're creating stuff one day, and then it's like, wait, I have to make sure that this budget is 100% so that people know what's going on. And the schedule as well. But the budget is, it's like, it's people's heart, you
Oh
know?
yeah.
The schedule and the design is sort of like your head, but for a lot of people, it's their heart or their ulcer or their stomach, whatever. But you better get that right.
Oh, 100%.
And so a lot of architects do not get involved in that piece.
Okay.
They just give it to the contractor.
Yeah. They
And
focus
so
more on the
when
schedule.
I shepherd somebody through and I say, I'm your agent with the contractor and I'm your agent for design, they instill a lot of power to me. And it has to be taken very seriously.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And
So,
so if I can do both those things, that's my challenge.
mhm.
And even when times are difficult, I have to have that air of confidence so that they don't flip out.
Oh yeah, especially when you're handling that much money, like that situation you were just talking about. If you don't have any confidence, the
Hmm.
job's going to go. And that's when they start to micromanage you too. So when they don't
Hmm.
see that confidence in you, they're going to pick every little thing apart and make your life harder because you're not confident in the project and what you're doing.
Right. And it may be because they don't understand it, like all of the things you were saying before. We're shepherding them. Maybe they don't know. Maybe they don't know the framing budget is this, and later on when we buy the material, it might adjust or whatever. They don't know these things. So besides the fact that they may or may not know intellectually the information, it's that underneath part where if you're confident and you know that it's going in the right direction, then they'll be okay with sort of giving it up to a professional.
Agreed. Agreed. Yes.
And it takes a lot to get to that point.
Oh, it does. Yeah, and it will come with time too, because not everybody's born with that. That
Or
confidence.
sometimes they're in love with you the first day and they hire you like a date, and then you get into the crappy part and you have to get through it together and you hope that they still love you in the end.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Exactly.
Hmm. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. This is we haven't got into conversations that I didn't think we were going to get into, and I loved it. That's a topic that we never really touched on in this podcast, and this was such an awesome conversation, Nancy. I really want to thank you for coming on today. I want to
Thank
end
you.
with where people could find you, your website, social media, anything.
Yeah, so WeinmanArchitecturalServices.com and or architect.vip. And listen, it's very easy to find somebody if you want to find somebody today, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'll have it all tagged in the description of the podcast and the caption on social media. But I want to thank you again for hopping on, taking time out of your schedule to hop on the Pro Series podcast today, Nancy.
Yes, thank you so much, and thank you for the exposure. It's very much appreciated.
Oh, anytime.